Welcome back to the Green Rush Live. I am Josh Kincaid. I'm going to be your host while Jimmy is out. I'm also the host of the Talking Hedge. That's your cannabis business podcast. Today, we're talking about everything that is cannabis science today. So we've got a couple of great guests today. One of them is going to be Trey Reckling, founder and director of the Academy of Cannabis Sciences. We've also got Dr. Jokūbas Žiburkus. He's the CEO and co-founder of Adendox. And so we're going to be talking about everything cannabis for the next, 25 minutes here. Jumping right in, let's talk about the entourage effect. Trey, what is the entourage effect?
Oh, the entourage effect. It's that thing that we wish more cannabis consumers knew about, right?
Yeah.
It's recognizing that the cannabis plant has, well over 100 cannabinoids or active ingredients. Although we usually only talk about the rock stars, we talk about THC and CBD. But increasingly, people are aware that there are just a host of active chemicals called cannabinoids. And the idea of, and not only cannabinoids, but terpenes and other synergistic elements in the plant. And the idea that it's a symphony effect. It's an entourage of all the possible effects from the plant work together to have a better total combined effect than any singular component. So kind of going to the symphony and making sure we're not just yelling for the tubas. We make use of all the instruments on the stage sort of thing for that entourage effect.
So would it be fair to say that an isolate is probably not as good as like flower, for example, that has full spectrum?
Personally, yeah, on the most base level, I would say that. But then we know they have their role, right? If you're formulating a medicine and you need to be precise and you're trying to target a condition, there's that school of thought, which mostly Western medicine, where we can finesse something to be perfect for a condition. But in the meantime, I personally like the more holistic plant approach, where we're trying to use the whole range of compounds in the plant. But we know that's problematic for some people who might have allergies or other conditions that need to be accommodated for. So yeah, but a lot of people don't know this, and they pick up a pack of edibles and it says 10 milligrams of THC per serving, and they're like, okay, that's what I need. But some consumers just don't know they're leaving a lot on the table. There's a lot of compounds, terpenes, cannabinoids, and the rest, flavonoids, that they might feel a great effect from, or even have some significant health benefit from.
Yeah. And maybe we can jump into some of those more minor or rare cannabinoids as the podcast gets going. But Dr. Žiburkus, I want to talk to you about the stigma. Is your opinion that the stigma of cannabis is still there, or is it being removed within the scientific community? What's your personal take on cannabis and the stigma?
I think the stigma, it is still there, but it very much is fragmented at the moment. I'm noticing that the universities and the academicians and the researchers or clinicians that are in the States where cannabis has robust medical cannabis programs and even adult use programs, they're more open to it because they're surrounded by it, and their patients or their subjects are somehow involved or are partaking either for medicinal purposes or otherwise recreational purposes. However, if you go down into the academic halls, as I say, there's still skepticism whether medical cannabis is not just a front for having a good time. And there's also, I think, some issues with the leadership. I think that a lot of the academic leadership is an older generation folks. They are, I am, coming to a mature age myself, more or less, but I would say most of the university-run department chairs and research facilities, they're run by people that are in their 60s. And there is a disconnect there. And I even hear from some of my colleagues at the university in their 60s saying, well, I did this when I was in Woodstock, but now it's no longer that Woodstock type of weed that we're talking about, but they're really not even interested in finding out the details of it. So I think that there's fragmentation, there's more acceptance coming in, but it's also a generational thing, I believe, that needs to be looked at, not just whether it's something that has been proven to be medicinally valuable or valuable for research purposes.
So, Trey, what is it going to take for the scientific community? I originally wrote the question and I asked, when is the scientific community going to find something meaningful that's going to benefit and debunk the international classification of cannabis as a Schedule I narcotic? But rather than trying to pick out a crystal ball and say when, I'm going to say what. What is it going to take in order for the scientific community to debunk cannabis as a Schedule I narcotic?
It's a good question. Sometimes it takes crisis. Sadly, the opioid crisis in America and wider than America has helped people to examine themselves, their families, their own practices, doctors to examine how they prescribe medicine, and looking at tens of thousands of deaths and more a year. I think people are willing to look at a lot of things differently. Pain management is kind of been on a single track for a long time, and we see how that track can end up to be really deadly for folks. So I think that crisis alone can do a lot and is doing a lot, because while all this news is going on about the pharmaceutical companies and how many billions of dollars they're getting sued, there's this steady trickle of continued research about cannabis, this legitimate research that now is beginning to be supported by the federal government after it had been blocked for decades and decades. So while one thing is becoming realized, the dangers of an opioid approach, there's something comes up at the same time, because we know pain's not going away, and anybody in serious pain will tell you, look, I'll take about anything to take care of this. And so I think there's a great opportunity there, and like Dr. Jokūbas said, sometimes it's the young people leading us, and as a new generation comes on and says, look, I was taught misinformation, and I want to know the real information. So I think that curiosity gets us a long way, and so do outliers. Those early adopters who say, look, this is not popular in my community, but I'm a pastor, I'm a senior citizen, I'm a member of a minority who's been crushed by the laws around this drug, and I'm going to speak up because my community needs to know they could be getting benefit from this, and they're still believing the old hype about how dangerous this is. So I think it's a lot of fronts going on at the same time, in the benefit and in the positive for the reputation of cannabis as a medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard some folks talk about the CB1, CB2 receptor cell. I think this is part of like the Entourage Effect. Dr. Ethan Russo talks about how if you take, any kind of painkiller, it's going to just sit and hover on top of those receptor cells instead of being drawn into. And that's part of the endocannabinoid system, is these cannabinoids are built for these receptors rather than just being like duct tape. And causing your body to be in a state of dis-ease. It's creating more of a dynamic balance between the two. And so I'm curious, maybe Dr. Z, you can talk about if cannabinoids are being redefined on how we approach and treat diseases. I think you're on mute.
It's a great question. It's a deep question. And I think in general, maybe I should place this in a broader perspective, that I think that the pharmaceutical companies are reevaluating and seeing benefits in plant-derived medications too. Mm-hmm. Now, I do believe that the next 2 decades are going to usher a lot of cannabinoid-derived medications into the pharmaceutical, over-the-counter, and prescription medication realm. It's very limited so far because, as you know, in the United States, on the pharmaceutical side, we only have synthetic THC that's approved for nausea, vomiting, wasting syndrome, and plant-derived cannabidiol, CBD, 10%, which is in the form of a drug, Epidiolex. And that drug is taking over a substantial share of the pediatric epilepsy and pediatric seizure market just by itself, despite the fact of many different CBD preparations being out there in over-the-counter world and the store world. So how is cannabinoids? Cannabinoids are going to be very important. So far, we spend our time on THC, CBD. We're going to start looking, people already started looking into more minor cannabinoids. There's going to be a library of cannabinoid and cannabinoid combinations in different ratios, as you mentioned, to effectively bind to whether it's CB1, CB2 receptor, or other systems in our bodies that it can target. I also have to say that I have a strong feeling that on this wave of cannabinoid medications and even cannabinoid pharmaceuticals, we have a very fast-paced growing wave of psychedelic and other plant-derived active ingredients and medications. And I really believe that this is even going to be even more interesting from the therapeutic and medical perspective, potentially than cannabinoids, because psychedelics are really about harm reduction, about kicking the habit, whatever the habit is. It's treating the problems, and it's really about the environments and the protocols by which people will be involved in the psychedelic medications, rather than large growths that will have to sell a lot of cannabis. So I always say that it's also very interesting, because with cannabis, you need a lot of cannabis to derive cannabinoids. With psychedelics, for example, like fungi or mushrooms, you probably feed the entire city therapeutically from just a single home that grew that. So I think there's also interesting thing there. Volume, maybe, diversity in ingredients, and this approach from cannabinoids that is now leading us into other medications, and pharmaceutical companies are listening very intently.
Is the FDA currently the cannabis industry's biggest hurdle? I definitely don't want to make this a leading question, but in terms of ailments, in terms of getting the word out, in terms of educating people, is the FDA's if the FDA doesn't allow for us to make these statements on helping these ailments, is that the industry's biggest hurdle, Trey?
Oh, it's certainly one of them. It's certainly one of the largest legal hurdles, right? But then you've got the AMA, who's been fairly tepid on when it comes to cannabinoid medicine. They've improved. The AVMA, people who've been to their veterinarians, who want to have conversations with their veterinarians about cannabis medicine for their pets. Veterinarians feel kind of hamstrung and I can't professionally talk about this without risking my license. And even healthcare professionals in our state in Washington can't use the substance without risking their own licenses. And so you've got people who could be champions for the plant who aren't allowed to talk about it, aren't allowed to use it. So there are a lot of institutional barriers as well, in addition to the stigma. And then inability to transfer across state lines is I'm sure, limiting research and affecting the way that people can compare, genetic samples and available medicines in their own states. So, you're having to replicate some studies in different conditions or slightly different conditions. So there's a lot of things that make this different, that we've created a system that works against this, right? Because up until not too long ago, it was still very illegal in most places. And it's always important to point out, we've still got 50,000 people sitting in jail right now. While some people are making millions of dollars, some people are spending their lives in prison. So it's a real hypocrisy, the whole system. And so, but I'm glad I'm glad we're seeing some major change. And Dr. Žiburkus, I apologize, I misspoke. I called you doctor by your first name, so I apologize for that.
It's all good.
How about GMOs? Would you consider cannabis a GMO, Trey? Because Blue Dream's just not the same anymore.
Well, I think people say that, but I think it's more appropriately to say it's selectively bred, right? So where genetic modification actually is about affecting and changing the genome or the genetic sample. What we've done is a tremendous amount of selective breeding that started if a lot of people know, when paraquat started getting sprayed on medical marijuana crops in California, people had to bring their stuff inside, and if you're growing inside, you got less landscape, or less acreage to work with. So that's how people want to complain about the strength of the plant, but that led to the strength of the plant and thousands of varietals that didn't, kind of these Frankenstein, sugar daddy sweet cake cultivar and all that, all that stuff that is a long way removed from the original intent. So the selective breeding kind of took us, we talk about in class or at the academy about going to the vet's office and you see the poster with the wolf at the top and the teacup poodle and all the little specialty breeds at the bottom. And that's where a lot of people are shopping right now, is in the specialty breed categories. And some people who aren't older have never had an opportunity to try some of the landrace strains, that are more 1-to-1 ratio and more like nature intended. So, we know there's a scramble for people to preserve those type of genetics. But yeah, sorry, I went off on a tangent there. But no, yeah, I think it's a really important conversation as we get real excited about the variety, that we don't lose our true OGs, our original heirloom quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hopefully somebody out there is holding some of those genetics for sure. I know they are with Acapulco Gold and White Widow and some of these old strains, but some of the good ones, you just don't see them anymore. Like I mentioned, Blue Dream of 2008 just isn't the same anymore. But hopefully people are going out and spreading the word. I know I just went to the vet for my cat who's got some kind of inflammation. I asked about CBG or anti-inflammatories. She had never heard of it. And so she said she's going to do some research and see if she would recommend that I use it. Since I put that in my coffee every day, maybe I'll start putting in my cat's coffee too. When we talk about consistency in cannabis and the bioavailability issues, do you guys see that being solved through the nano-emulsion technology? Dr. Žiburkus, I'll start with you. Is nano-emulsion technology going to help with overdosing on edibles, for example, bioavailability, consistency?
Absolutely. I think that the two key things, especially when you talk about edibles, is the speed, the onset, when a person feels an effect from an edible, and if it is an intoxicating or euphoria-like effect from THC, or if it is another sort of effect, more medicinal effect from other cannabinoids, or even inhibition of appetite by other cannabinoids. So I think that the onset is very important, and how much of it gets into the blood. This is the bioavailability that you're talking about. I'd like to put a blame on the cannabis industry and the cannabis companies themselves for not doing this research. I wanted to allude back a little bit to the FDA as a regulatory agency that you can persuade. So it's actually the fault of the large MSOs for not pouring in about $500 million to $1 billion in the last 5 years in all of the medicinal aspects of cannabinoids and putting it on the FDA's table and saying, have a look, do you have anything better? Do you have anything that shows a lot more harm or things like that? I think so. That's where I think we have to be a lot more proactive as a community, actually, in doing this research. And as you know, for multiple state operators, for MSOs, and medical research is a PR front. I realized that the hard way of really trying to do that as a part of MSO or persuading MSOs to do that. Mm-hmm. So now, when you talk about these nano-emulsions, if it can solve the problem of having a fast onset and peak concentration in the blood in a fast period of time that is controllable and metabolizes quickly or in a controlled fashion. Let's say if you can drink water or consume something and it reduces, whether it's a euphoric effect or something like that, it will be solutions for sure. And the same cannabis companies should be already designing nano delivery and nano spray devices.
Mm-hmm. Why isn't there a test to check for cannabis impairment? Trey, I know you've been a part of in Washington State. You've been a part, I think, of the Department of Transportation and Washington State Patrol with their, intoxication, whatever the DUI issues. Do you know why a system doesn't work yet for cannabis impairment? Any opinions about that?
Well, we're looking at cannabis like it's alcohol once again, right? And we're assuming that the impairment from cannabis is going to be just as dangerous and debilitating as impairment from alcohol. And there's a department, gosh, I forget specifically which department did the study, but there are studies that show that the cannabis impairment is nothing like alcohol impairment. For one, combined, they're worse than alcohol, right? More potentially dangerous. But instead, I wish we were having a conversation about training officers on viewing reckless behavior, because it's ultimately about poor driving behaviors or unsafe, identifying unsafe driving practices. That's more, and I want to be very clear, we're never advocating for anybody to consume and drive, right? That's just not a smart move legally or public safety wise or anything. But I wish we were having a conversation not about catching people, but one about educating people not to, training officers to look for reckless behavior that might be dangerous, and then focusing on that regardless of the cause. Is it because you were smoking a joint? Is it because you were texting? Is it because you were dropping fries between the seat you were trying to grab? I mean, I think we're losing, just like we talk about the dangers of cannabis in the house without talking about bleach and liquid plumber and all the rest. I think we lose the focus when we're just talking about catching somebody and saying, oh, you're above the threshold. Because as a patient, I'm probably almost always above the 5 nanogram threshold. Mm-hmm. Technically, right? I wouldn't drive if I believed I was impaired, but I think the conversation needs to be readjusted. So I dodged on you there, but.
No, that's all right. My next question, Dr. Žiburkus, is how do you match the right cultivar to the right person?
You obviously want to know, first of all, about the person in the endocannabinoid system. Some of us have what we call high endocannabinoid tone and tolerability for cannabinoid molecules, whether they're endogenous or exogenous. Some of us have enzymes that produce a lot more of this endocannabinoid molecules in our bodies naturally. Therefore, we can also tolerate more naturally the exogenous cannabinoids that will bind to the same receptors that endocannabinoid molecules do. The second thing is you want to know what is exactly, not necessarily in the cultivar, but in the finished product. You want to know exactly what the subset of the main active cannabinoids in the flower or edible or finished product or oil, major terpenes. It's important to pay attention to that. And then trying to really match up the two, what is in the finished product to how that person's inside is reflected. We're not quite there yet. For that, I believe there are companies that are designing genetic tests that can tell you about your endocannabinoid state, and potentially companies from Seattle, actually, in Washington too, like EndoCanada. They're trying to look at this kind of a 23andMe approach for cannabinoid interactions with your major systems and then the cannabinoid system state. And then on the other hand, what we have to do in the field, we have to, we respect the strains and the genes and things like that, but the final output in the product or the flower is going to be slightly different. It's important to know those active ingredients. And so it's probably going to happen in the next decade. There's going to be some smart technology that's linked to genetic markers, other markers, the active ingredients in the plant, and some sort of consumer experience tracking that will help people refine the exact cultivars products that they are best fit.
So Trey, I'm not comfortable sending my blood to 23andMe to find out what the best strain is. And I've been smoking for 25 years and I haven't found the best strain yet. And it seems like when I do, they just change it, or it modifies, or it's not available, or the grower moved states or stopped growing. You know what I mean? There's so many. Like my favorite right now is this hemp blunt stick from Panacea, 3.5 grams for like $18 when it's on sale. And yet you can't find it. So I don't know if the farm is either got some spider mite issues, or they just don't go to this store that always has 30% off, or like whatever the reason is, there's always some reason you can't find what you want when you actually find what you want. So how do you go about finding what you like, Trey, or your students at the Academy of Cannabis Science? How do they find what they want? Like what's a good way? Do you just go and get a pre-roll and you test out different cultivars, or what's your go-to?
I think it's a great question. We get to work with a lot of patients, a lot of patient providers, and we try to help people set their expectations in the way I think we're not naturopaths, but we work with them as our faculty, and some of the conversations they lead our students into is talking about being comfortable with a little inexactness and understanding this is holistic medicine. So instead of finding just the right cultivar, find the zone. Is it a 1-to-1 ratio that makes you feel the best? Is it something that's prevalent linalool terpene? Is it is it linalool combined with another? Is it a limonene? That's your combo, and then find out what that's related to. So you don't just have to rely on Jack Herrera, but maybe Frosted Jack Rec is also in that family. So you can shop from the family, and then ideally, if you're allowed to grow, stock up. Learn to cross and perpetuate some of those things that are good for you, so that you'll always have them on hand and know that they're grown cleanly.
That's great. It's 4:20 somewhere, which means we've got to get out of here and shut this thing down. So, Dr. Žiburkus, where can they find you at? Where can they get some more information on where you're at?
They can look up my name, and they'll probably see a TEDx talk. And my company's name is Adendox, like ADENDOX, adendox.com, and they can reach out to me through there as well, or on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn.
Trey, where can people get some more information?
Absolutely, from academyofcannabisscience.com, and we encourage you also to go to our YouTube page, where we have dozens of hours of free education with some really smart friends of ours from the industry. So
that's awesome. All right, but I think with that, we're gonna have to roll this one up. So we will see you guys next Friday. Again, I want to thank my guest Trey Reckling, founder and director, Academy of Cannabis Sciences, and Dr. Jokūbas Žiburkus, CEO and co-founder of Adendox. Appreciate both of you guys being here. Thank you very much, and everybody watching. Come back next week. In the meantime, have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys all later. Peace.
With that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out. Don't forget to smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.